So maybe just for background, I've known Hilary now for probably 4 or 5 years through my own training in the institute that you're a certified supervisor on, and you've actually supervised me as well in accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. And I think in the course of knowing you, the one thing that I really value and really love about Hilary's work is how she makes it really accessible, and how she takes kind of inward-facing psychotherapy concepts and just makes them really digestible. And I think that it kind of came to a whole new stage of kind of making it accessible with the op-ed piece that you wrote in the Times, also with the same title of your book, of It's Not Always Depression. And I again was just really, really struck by finally somebody had kind of put these concepts out that we've been chewing on that were about affective neuroscience and attachment theory, and then there it was, just in such an approachable format to be thinking about mental health in a very radically different way. And I'd love maybe just to start our chat tonight by hearing a little bit about kind of what went into your thinking to write that op-ed, and kind of where the concept came from, where kind of your own ideas came from for the op-ed.
Okay, thanks, Courtney.
Yeah.
I picked like the best person to bring with me. She's gorgeous and smart, and she travels all over the world and speaks. Yeah.
Thank you, Hilary.
I think it really began when I finished graduate school for my social work degree, and I was about to go into psychoanalytic training, and I stumbled upon this whole other way of working, which had to do with emotions. I ended up at a conference that a friend of mine recommended that I see this woman, Diana Fosha, and listen to her and what she had to say, and she was a specialist in emotions. And I had been trained, my first career was as a dentist, which meant that I was in medical school at Columbia for the first 2 years with the medical students. So I had a full medical, biological, academic education, and I was a science nerd before that. I was a biochemistry major in college, and I was science all the time, and raised by 2 intellectual parents. My mom is in the front, very psychologically oriented. My dad was a psychiatrist, and it was all insight and thinking about the way the mind works. So when I went to this emotion conference in 2004, I was exposed to this whole other realm of science-based information on emotions, and that emotions were physical sensations, which we'll talk about later. And it was an epiphany for me, and it changed the way I understood myself. My anxiety now made sense to me as having blocked emotions, these biological factors, and it changed the way that I would decide to practice, and it changed the way I understood myself and my relationships. So I went on to study this thing called AEDP, and I went on to study psychoanalytic training because I thought that was that's sort of what would legitimize me in New York City as a psychotherapist. But I started to talk about this triangle that I had learned there. Okay, so flash forward, I'm seeing patients. I have a patient that was very hard, that was treated, I don't know how many of you read the article, but had been treated with all these different methods for depression, and I didn't want to repeat the same thing again, knowing everything had been done already, and having studied emotions and trauma-informed theory, which is really this whole other way of understanding the mind, I decided to treat this person as someone who was a trauma survivor, and they recovered. And I thought that was really important, and it validated everything I learned in real time and what my colleagues were also experiencing, and the kind of results they were getting. And I had been reading the couch column in the New York Times, and one day on vacation with my husband who's in the back, I was like, I think I have something to say about this person that I'm working with, and I wrote the article and submitted it to the Times, never thinking that in a million years it would get published, but it did, and then it resonated on such a deep level that it went, as we say today, viral, and somebody asked me to write a book on it as an extension of that, what I was talking about.
I mean, I think
it was thrilling.
maybe the thing, and I'm sure that there's maybe people in the audience have, if they've read it, maybe have their own reactions to it. But I think, again, the thing for me in reading it, and I know actually of clients that have come to me after reading this article, I think the thing that's really lovely about it and your style and your approach is, again, it just humanizing people's experiences. So I think that there's always been this sense in mental health about kind of stigmatizing depression. It's a clinical thing. And I don't mean to be minimizing of depression. But the thing that was really lovely and striking about how you wrote the op-ed is getting people thinking, why am I depressed in a way that's not an examination of why I'm so messed up or neurotic? It's an examination of maybe why is this part of the adaptive story of my life? Just kind of why is this part of how I've come to be in the world? And this kind of really just accepting kind of natural way of just thinking, how did the depression get here in this really kind of just human adaptive way? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's also why this ADP and this type of work resonated, because the spin in the medical community and the psychiatric community and growing up with a psychiatrist was looking at what's wrong, looking at pathology, a lot of blaming, talking about resistance and the patient not wanting to get better. And here was a whole other way to approach it that wasn't like Pollyanna and sweet. It actually made sense. That symptoms had meaning, and that if we could understand what led to the symptom, that we could, treat the underlying cause.
Right.
And the brain, we know now, changes with neuroplasticity, and just the whole thing made sense. And so I love this idea that, when someone comes in, it used to be that you were given a diagnosis, you're anxious and you're depressed, and that was the end of the story. And now we know that's just the beginning of the story, and the work is the healing that goes on underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's nice to see all these familiar faces.
I know.
And the non-familiar ones, too.
Familiar and unfamiliar. Yeah. I mean, I guess I was just thinking, again, as you're saying it, I just think it, just to kind of hear your passion for this model and this work, I think, again, just seeing it at a really close-up, with a close-up lens of just how impactful it can be, and was for this, again, this one client who I was sharing with you, who read the article and came into treatment with me, that this idea, and also for this person's family to start to understand them and totally rewrite the story of who they were in the family, not as somebody who was a depressed person or someone who was acting out or always a problem, but somebody who was maybe struggling with some shame about some really normal experiences in their life, and it was really transformative, really just such a human and adaptive way of kind of thinking about people's experiences. Yeah. So I'm curious, how did it get to, it sounds like there's this kind of pickup after the article came out, and I'm wondering just kind of, maybe just at a human level, I'd be curious to know kind of what was that like for you?
Oh, it was thrilling. I mean, in terms of that, the recognition of the thing. Yeah, that was amazing and thrilling, and mostly what it's always there. I do have a pet peeve about this information not being available, and it's just, it only fuels it with this book. There's so much. I think emotion education is a public health issue. I think this stuff should be taught to everybody in high school, similar the way we are in high school bio and we learn that we have a heart and lungs and a stomach. And I think it would have been helpful to me to understand that my emotions were body-based physiological responses to the environment that were appropriate, and that to get along in our society and culture, sometimes we have to thwart those emotions.
Right.
And if you do that too much, it causes anxiety and other symptoms.
Right.
And if we have a few tools if we just know that, it makes a difference.
Right.
That's why the book is an education. If you do nothing else with it, it's just an education that I think will change the way you think about yourself and others.
Right.
So to me, it's really a passion about sharing information and really feeling angry that for some reason we live in a society and maybe a world that is afraid of emotions, or that really doesn't know what to do with them. And there are reasons for that,
Right.
in a way. Back in the olden times, when people were angry, they would kill each other.
Right.
And now we live in a modern society where people are thinking more, have more time to think and self-actualize. So now we need tools to
Figure out what to do with these feelings that are just hardwired.
Right, we're not
and
foraging
there
for
for
food
survival.
anymore. Exactly.
Yeah.
So people, we need skills, and it's time, I think, that they. And I think the zeitgeist is changing. That's why Random House published the book.
I hope so. I hope
yeah.
this is part of the zeitgeist change. So, coming to the book then, there's, because it sounds like the piece in the Times was really kind of your first bigger public publication, wider audience publication.
Yes.
And so I'd be curious to know, when you approached to do the book, kind of, how did you start to kind of think about it? Kind of, what were you starting to kind of hope would go into the book? Kind of, what was your transition from going to this great and really powerful op-ed piece to thinking about how to kind of flesh this out in a longer format for this book?
Well, I really had so much good fortune. After the piece came out, I had somebody approach me. I had two literary agents asked me if I would write a book that was an extension of the article. And at first I said, I'm not a writer. No, there's no book in me. And both of these people sort of looked me in the eye and said, I don't think that's true. And one particular, Richard Abadi, who became my agent, just said, think about if there's something that you want to share. And I thought about it, and then this triangle dawned on me that I learned at this conference in 2004, and really had the thought then that everybody should know about this. So I started to think about, okay, I'm going to write about the triangle. And what this triangle is just a simple diagram, and I love threes. Yeah. So it's simple in concept, and it's diagramming the relationship between these. So if you superimpose a triangle so that the point of it is in your core, at the bottom of this triangle are these things called core emotions, which are these biologically based experiences that we've evolved over millions of years to have, that really tell us if we're safe or in danger, tell us about our needs and our wants, when we feel good and we want to move towards something, and when we are frightened and need to move away. And they are biological experiences because they happen very quickly. So like, if a tiger was to come into this room, we'd all be running before our conscious mind
Hadn't even really processed it.
Right,
Yeah.
wouldn't even know that we were frightened. And it's only after that you are in safety that this sort of cerebral cortex, which evolved later in life, in the evolution of us, comes on board and assesses for danger. So at the bottom of this triangle are these core emotions, and when they flow, when you have a feeling, you can feel it. It happens in your body. There's an agitation, there's a disturbance, and then it passes like a wave, hopefully, and you go back to baseline. And that's what we want to happen, an emotion to be useful, for us to listen to it, and then for our mind and body to relax again.
When things are working smoothly.
When things are working smoothly. But what happens in our culture, because to get along with others, we have to block emotions often. And we're also taught in our culture the way to cope with overwhelming feeling is to distract yourself, to avoid it, to block it. And we have all these distractions, from drugs and alcohol to now screens to a myriad of ways. So on the top of the triangle, so when we block these core emotions, we move up to anxiety, which is at one corner. And because anxiety and feelings feel so uncomfortable at best, we move to the other corner of the triangle, to defenses. And defenses are not in the pejorative way that I was taught sort of in psychoanalytic training.
I think that's a really important point to stress a couple of, to really emphasize, because I think the word still carries so much charge. I think even if I'm talking to clients about it, I think you're really talking about it in a very, very different way than most people think of defenses, as being kind of like purposefully
like you're doing
resistant
this,
and oppositional. It's really not that at all. You're really talking about it in a different way.
Yes, and so by definition, a defense is just anything that we do to avoid feeling something that's uncomfortable. which makes sense to do. So those are the three corners of the triangle: core emotions, inhibitory emotions, which are anxiety, guilt, and shame. These are all the ways that we block feeling to get along with each other, and defenses. And so getting back to your question, I wanted to design the book in a way that, one, was not boring, because I'm not a great reader. And I wanted to tell stories, because I think that's the way to best understand emotions. You can't think your way through an emotion. You have to experience it. So I wrote stories from my practice that are evocative, and they're emotional, that show how I take people from defensive states of living down to their core emotions, through them to where they feel, again, this sense of calm and connection and your authentic self, your best kind of self. But because I'm intellectual, and I also like science and learning, I peppered each section. There's a story, there's a scientific explanation that's simply written without jargon, because my mother taught me not to use jargon. She tortured me about jargon for years, and I used to really not like it, and now I really like it, because she helped me be a better writer. And then I put exercises in so that you could have a taste of the experience yourself. So
And what I was saying to you, I think is nice about that, because I think that there's a way that therapists and shrinks can kind of talk about, feel your feelings and get underneath the surface. And I think it can be really overwhelming or kind of daunting, or even sometimes gets an eye roll, like, what's the point? And why would I want to be doing all this? Why would I even want to work this change triangle? And I think there's something just, again, very approachable about the idea about how to organize a set of internal experiences that we just all have. And some exercises about how to start to kind of access some of these experiences.
Exactly. And I think organizing, that was the key word for me when I learned this triangle. I felt organized. I think I'm sure everyone can relate. When you're anxious, you can just kind of, it's like you're swooning. You're just anxious. What do you do with it? And now there's a prescription for what to do with it. If you choose to, and if you don't, that's okay too. But there's the anxiety has meaning, and there's something that can be done if you want to do with it. Do that.
Absolutely. That it could be a signal of something else. And that something else isn't something to be scared of or judgmental about. It's our hardwired stuff. It's thank goodness you have a central nervous system and a body that's working if there's something else going on. Exactly.
Right. Feelings just are.
They just are.
They just are.
So,
and we have choices of how we can work with them, and we can work with them to create problems for ourselves, and we can work with them to create more mental health and to create resilience in our brain, and to be able to meet the challenges of life. And there are many challenges of life for everybody all the time.
I was maybe on that note, I was really struck in the book. I was really appreciative that you were also disclosing kind of your own experiences and own kind of story. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing a little bit about what this triangle actually meant to kind of some maybe critical moments in your own life of kind of understanding those really stressful times in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, even so much as like today, right before I came here today, I did a live radio show, which is the first time I've ever done that.
It's really
and
exciting.
I knew, but I was anxious all day, and working the change triangle all day, basically.
Working it, talking about it, doing everything.
Exactly. So that's the kind of thing where I ask myself, I'm always trying to name the emotions under the anxiety, and sometimes it's hard to tell, but I'll just go through them. The core emotions, there's 7 of them that I talk about in the book, because they're easy, they're the ones that you can work with in life. So there's sadness, anger, fear, disgust, joy, excitement, and sexual excitement. And what I could locate today is that I was fearful and I was excited. And the trick is to kind of hold them both together, and it's a fresh feeling, right? There's nothing that can be done. Both of these feelings were adaptive in that I was doing something new, so it made sense to be frightened, and it made sense to be excited, because this is very exciting and new. But just that, and that's sort of just a little, sort of a light exercise, but the brain is wired where when we can put, the brain likes, so we've got these things, it's not really right brain, left brain, but there's the experiential brain that has emotions and experiences life, and then there's the logical brain that puts language on things, that tries to create meaning. And so when we have an experience in our body that we can put some language on, it seems to calm down the whole system. So even just, instead of just sort of reeling from anxiety, knowing, I'm scared and I'm excited.
Right.
And using that and, it's not I'm scared, but I'm excited, it's both. I'm scared and I'm excited. Just feels a little bit better. And then you can try to figure out ways, what can I do to soothe my fear, get a hug from somebody, just tell myself it's natural.
Right.
But there's a variety of creative ways, and I try to show a lot of ways in the book to work with it. No magic bullets. Feelings just happen in response to life, and it's not good and it's not bad. It just is.
Just are.
And we need a lot of coping strategies that are healthy and to manage them.
Absolutely. I guess I'm thinking that, I think the example just from today is really prescient and current and helpful. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about if there's folks that in the audience who are wondering, well, that might be helpful for something like today that was maybe a lighter stress or, a small stressor. But is this something that also helps people with larger difficulties? And if you could kind of speak to what is their experience of using this change triangle and naming these feelings, because not every feeling to name is excitement, and not every fear to name is something about a fear about getting up and speaking today in front of this lovely group. So could you speak to maybe about, there's some really nice examples in the book, but kind of speak to what are people's experiences in your practice of working with this change triangle, kind of what happens for them when they're putting words to really complicated, difficult feelings.
So just to frame, the change triangle is, there's many levels to use it. There's the self-help aspect of it, which I write about, just even understanding how emotions work and being able to begin to notice where you are. The people that come to me need a little bit more. So depending on how much trauma we have, so I'm going to give you then an example of what it looks like when there's past trauma. So most people come in because they're either anxious or depressed, and that's how they come in with the story. And then the question is, what happened? When did you begin to notice these symptoms? What is, what is depression to you? What are you actually experiencing? But most of the time we are uncovering childhood, what I would call trauma, but again, this is sort of needs to be addressed in the public. Most people, when they think of trauma, think of what's called in the jargon big T trauma, the major catastrophic events, war, being a victim of a crime, just a big event that changes your life in one moment. Small T trauma, or it's also called ACEs, adverse childhood events. You could speak to more of this, actually. Are the little things that happen that are not, parents always, 99.99, I believe parents mean well. We all do our best. But children, for a variety of reasons, just surviving childhood causes small T trauma, which are basically I define as the traumas that happen from trying to survive our childhood. So
attunements, not moments where parents may be going through a tough time and isn't as present or available to kind of do the day-to-day child care.
Or just being different, having a child that's different from you, having a child who's gay when you're straight, having a child that doesn't do well in school when everybody in the family went to Harvard. Being bullied, all those kind of things. So the adults that I see in my practice, there's always something that we go back to that's a root cause. And what I'm helping them do in terms of this triangle is to go back to a scene, but in a safe way. So the idea is not to re-traumatize someone, but to have one foot in the present with me, and then we go back and look at scenes, and they feel the feelings that they that they couldn't have at that time because it either wasn't safe, or the parent didn't know what to do, didn't welcome the feelings because the parent had their own feelings about emotions. So, for example, some parents don't like anger, and when a kid is angry, they shut it down. And then the kid has this bottled up anger, and bottled up core emotions put stress on the mind and body, creates anxiety or shame, and they go off into defenses. So I'm helping to work this triangle based on past experiences. So I help adults basically have anger on behalf of their child parts for the parents that couldn't be with them. I help them express the anger in safe ways using all sorts of techniques, which I'll show in the book, like fantasy. So if you tune in to anger in your body, and if you slow way down, you can begin to feel what these feelings feel like physically. Have to slow down to a snail's pace, and it's a practice that gets developed. But then when you listen to a core emotion, and you stay with it, an impulse begins to make itself known, energy begins to make itself known. And so a main question I might ask someone is, as you stay with this anger, this angry energy that you're now telling me you feel in your stomach, and if it could come up and out in a fantasy towards your mother, we'll say, what would the anger want to do? Not as a dress rehearsal for anything out in the world. This is just to help a person's nervous system to re-regulate. And they might do all sorts of things, from wanting to yell and curse to actually wanting to commit murder. But it's all safe, and at the end of it, they go through this wave, the whole nervous system relaxes, and in a moment, a trauma can be, the brain rewires, and people start to recover. And same thing with sadness. You'll let somebody mourn a loss that they could never mourn because there was nobody, they felt too alone for whatever reason. Work with fear. So we work with all the core emotions, trying to lower anxiety so it doesn't get in the way, and just work with the pure emotions so it can be liberated. Is that making sense to everybody? Okay. Okay. And the book, the stories really help clarify what it looks like.
They're very helpful, and I think they're very relatable in terms of just that they're in a therapy setting, but I think they're just relatable to everyday life.
Absolutely.
I think the thing that's that just strikes me, and I just may be curious for you to say just a little bit more, is kind of at the end of these waves, again, whether they're in the therapy session room with you or just your experiences of hearing people kind of work this triangle in their everyday life, my sense is what I've observed is a sense of relief. And it's such a kind of a counterintuitive, kind of paradoxical thing of, what do you mean I'm going to go into this core emotion, or I'm going to go into this big anger or this fear, and I'm going to feel better? It's kind of like, as the kids say, these little kids, like, what, the radish? Like, what are you talking about? That you're going to ask me to feel more, and I'm going to feel better? Why? So I'm just curious if you can say a little more from your vantage point. What have you observed has been people's experiences after they kind of ride this arc, and after they kind of, I think very courageously oftentimes kind of start to look at some of their core feelings and emotions.
Yes, it's very courageous.
Very courageous, yeah.
And when you start doing it, it's a leap of faith, and a good analogy maybe in the way. So it's this jump from going up into your head to going down into your body. So just think about when you're hungry, right? We're all comfortable going into our body and sensing our stomach, most of us, right? If you have an eating disorder, not so much, right? That's an example of when, we can use that as an analogy, when you're blocked from being able to sense something. But if you don't, you can tune into your stomach and know, I'm hungry. And then that hunger tells you to eat something, and then you feel better. So it's similar to a core emotion. Let's say there's sadness. Somebody that I love dies, and I want to help myself cry because it's stuck.
What's there?
Or it doesn't come easily. I focus in on where I feel the sadness in my body, and I teach breathing. So you want to breathe your way through a feeling and just let the physical feeling kind of move. What I tell people in session is kind of drop the storyline in your head and just tend to the emotion with compassion for yourself and curiosity, and just let it do what it needs to do, and it will move and flow. As many of you might know, when you have a good cry, it's scary to go into it, and then you're in it, and then there's a feeling of relief. And that's how it is with all the core emotions. That's by definition. You stay with the core emotion because it's wave-like and there is relief at the end, versus staying with feelings that are on the top of the triangle, like anxiety or guilt and shame. I don't have people stay with those feelings because you get caught, they loop around, there's no end, there's no resolve. Those feelings have to be transformed, moved over, healed.
Right.
How do you work with like guilt and shame? Like it's...
I wish I could say it as elegantly, but yeah, I think that they need to be transformed. And I think this is again where people can kind of sink into them, and it's despairing in and of itself. I think it's part of how people can kind of start to rethink their story.
Yes.
You know, that that there's something wrong with me versus if we move that aside, what else might be there.
Yes.
So I'm just noticing that we actually don't have too much time left, and what I want to make sure.
Wow.
Is
that went
that
fast.
Yes, 5, yeah. I know it went really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, first I just wanted to slow down for a second because I was just, when you were doing the description of kind of the breath work, I had this lovely little glimmer of what it's like to kind of hang out with you or also be your client. I was like, that feels really nice. Thank you, Hilary. But I really want to make sure before we go and maybe move to some questions from the audience, if there are some, I maybe just want to make sure that we got one last beat and kind of moment for you to really kind of share with the audience here what you really want this book to do. Kind of what's your best hope and goal for what you want this book to do, how you hope that people might use it in their life. Yeah.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I just wanted to put the education out there. I think it helps whether you decide to work this triangle or not. I think it will make everybody feel better to understand. Just the understanding of yourself will help. The intellectual understanding. I think even just in our I grew up thinking I was supposed to control my emotions. Right. And I felt badly when I got angry, and I was scared of my sadness, and so I used to get, I felt anxious if I had to go to a funeral. I used to think I was supposed to fix sadness. I had all these kind of misconceptions of what I was supposed to do with feelings, and so I hope that book will just put a lot of that just really change.
To really turn the volume up and just accepting feelings as they are. The core affects are there because they're just hardwired. They're just it's what your body's supposed to be doing. Yeah,
exactly. So, and I talk about each of the emotions. I talk about anxiety, guilt, and shame. We didn't talk about shame today, which is my favorite subject. Most people don't.
Which might sound weird.
I know.
If you don't know that it can, when it moves, it feels really good to see it move. Yeah.
Exactly. And shame is one of those strange emotions that even talking about shame brings up shame. People are so frightened of shame. I guess that's why I like it, because I like to change the dial on that one too. So I just want to mention, shame is a universal emotion. We all have it, and it's learned in a context. And there's good shame that civilizes us, but most of us come in most people into therapist's office with toxic shame. Right. Shame from feeling alone, disconnected, from feeling that there's something wrong with them for how they feel. And so I wanted the book to help undo that. So I talk about all these things and try to give as many nuggets just to take with you, either for you, for your relationships, for your children. Then the second layer is that through learning the explanations and through watching me take my patients through the triangle, that you will try the exercises. Absolutely. And that people will attempt to play around. I call them experiments because I want, it's A+ for trying, as I like to say.
There's some lightness there.
A lightness and a gentleness, and always with a compassion and a curiosity for yourself, right? It's the key to so much, this gentleness. We're so hard on each other and judgmental, and it's just not good for us. And if we can just understand some of these concepts and embrace that we are strong as humans, but also vulnerable, and we need to be treated kindly and gently. And I hope the book gets that across. So I just hope people read it and share it on whatever level that it helps mankind. I mean, in my most grandiose moments, I think emotion education is the key to ending war. Yeah. Because aggression, theoretically, if we can feed the whole world and people can have shelter, then we don't need to fight. Right. And what is all this aggression
about? Yeah.
And I think it's shame and anger that nobody knows what to do with.
Yeah. Certainly it couldn't be.
So that's a big topic. Yeah.
It's a big topic, but certainly it couldn't be better timed. And I think you can
Yeah.
read it with an eye towards thinking about and reflecting on what's going on currently in our country and in our world. And, I think having been lucky enough to get a preview of the book, I think it is something that you can read with depth. I think it's something you can read in reflection or kind of as a daily meditation. There's a lot of different exercises. I absolutely think it's a big contribution to the world, and I love the grandiosity because it's a vision I share and hope that your book is a massive contribution too. So I just want to say it's just been delightful to hear you talk more about. I know this is a topic that's really passionate, that you're very passionate about, and it's just lovely hearing you speak more about it. And I'm thinking maybe we should kind of pause this part and turn it over to the audience, but I don't know if there's any last words you'd want to say before we open it up for question.
There is just one last word, which is that I really wrote this book to be a page turner and easy to read.
Yes.
The concepts are big, but I wrote it to be to like it's not exactly summer beach reading, but it could be. It could be.
Yeah.
It's that type of a thing, story driven. So I hope
and
that you won't be intimidated.
Yeah. There's a lot of triangles.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now I'd love to, if anybody had any questions, I would be happy to answer anything. And let's just walk the walk and make this sort of a judgment-free zone, and just kind of, if possible, just to allow people to be curious and open. And really, there's no thing that everyone can feel free to ask anything that they want. And I'm sure that if you have a question in mind, other people do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll give my mic over.
Okay.
You got one already. Absolutely.
So thank you for writing this book, and I'm glad that you overcame your own apprehension for writing it back in 2015. And as a yoga teacher who works with people who've experienced trauma, I have a strong feeling based on the chat that this is going to add to my repertoire of tools, not only for my own personal journey, but others that I practice with. So thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, for those who are warriors, who worry about a result and have anxiety associated with that, since I haven't read your article or the book, but I plan to, would the change triangle apply to that sort of thing? Is there a tie to the past that usually has a predilection for people worrying about the future and results?
Yeah, great question. Yes. I think of worry, again, I think of it as a defense merely because I'm going to be looking for the feelings underneath, and it would have to go with your story. So I would be, if you weren't worrying about this, what might be happening inside your body? The worry takes us away. And oftentimes there's past traumas that we project, past fears that we project into the future. But anxiety, when you have it, can grab on to anything, right? You can, in a way, you can feel anxious, and then all of a sudden everything is scary and everything is overwhelming and is a worry. So we would begin by, I would want to hear what you're worrying about, and then kind of see, if you weren't worrying about that, what might you be what else might be going on? Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Liz. Thank you for the talk. It was
Liz.
great. I had a question in regards to prescription drugs. If someone is taking medicine for anxiety or depression, and then they take it and they don't, and that feeling goes away, does that hinder the ability to kind of go through the triangle and really process those emotions when you are taking prescription drugs?
That's a great question. You're saying that if you're taking an antidepressant and you're no longer depressed, can you still do the work of?
Yeah, more if you take, and this isn't for me.
Yeah.
But for Xanax, if you feel anxiety, you take the Xanax, and then the anxiety kind of goes away, subdues. So does that make the root of the anxiety last longer because you're unable to sort of go through all of the stages to get to the root of processing it? I know there's not exactly,
No,
know,
it's a
an
great
answer,
question. Yeah, I think what it does is it's not allowing you to address the root of the anxiety. So, if you're okay, if one is okay taking Xanax, and they don't care about the addictive qualities, and I have no judgment about medicine, and I will send someone to a psychiatrist so that we could do the work. 'Cause sometimes there's too much depression, so that you need a little scaffolding to be able to do some of the work. But it would really depend. But it would mask, right? So if somebody comes into the office and they're just feeling fine, they're not anxious anymore, we wouldn't be able to work with the anxiety necessarily to see what's underneath it. So it would hinder the work a bit. Just the same way if somebody came in drunk or stoned, you can't really, it's altering you can't do the work in the same way.
the ability to get to the root of
To get to the root, because we're working in the here and now. I'm not having somebody tell me something like in traditional, when I was in psychoanalysis, I would report on how I felt over the week. Here, someone's telling a story of something happened. Let's say I had a fight with my partner, and I might say, right here, right now, as you're sharing what your partner did to you, what do you notice if we slow down together? What do you notice feeling right now with me? Can we slow down and kind of notice what's happening in your body as you share this with me? So we're tracking all the time in the moment what's happening, and then working with whatever feeling is there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In the last couple years, I've noticed that there's this sort of pop culture trend that's marketed toward young women in particular of positivity and gratitude lists. And do you see detriment in that? I find it's quite troublesome that people don't have room to feel feelings, and they're constantly being told to write down what you're grateful for every day.
Yeah. You probably know how I feel about that already.
I guess, but I want to hear what you have to say.
I totally agree with you. It's like the concept of forgiveness, right? So it's like forgiveness is great and positivity is great. If you come to it, it has to feel real. It has to emerge, and it will emerge. And that's the beauty of the body and the brain, is that when you remove obstacles and you process traumas and you process feelings from old traumas and current feelings, what emerges is amazing. Is this, what I didn't say is that sort of the criticalness, the reason core emotions are so important is because when we move through them, it's the doorway to this authentic, calm state where we're calm and clear and compassionate and creative, all these good things, and you can feel then spontaneous, authentic compassion and joy and positivity that just feels rooted as opposed to contrived. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Question. Thank you. Anybody else?
Right. I just have a comment that my daughter's book actually helped me, and I thought I knew everything, but boy, I didn't. And it really helped me tremendously, and there's a perfect example.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you want to share.
In school,
Yeah.
and I was so anxious about getting good grades, which at my age doesn't matter in the slightest. Nobody is ever going to know what my grades are. And I'm reading Hilary's book, and it is a page turner, and I realize that my father had this look on his face if I didn't do well in school. Now, I thought he was all giving, all loving, all sweetness, and the sun rose and set, and it wasn't true. I checked it out with my first cousin. He said, no, your father was really judgmental. Anyway, my anxiety about getting good grades dissipated, and then I got good grades.
Because of working with child parts. In the book, I talk a lot. We work with child parts, with the adult and the sort of imagined child part, and that must have been what stimulated that.
Such a nice example of like the relief that comes even after you feel the judgment and the fear of failure. That there's some settling that can happen after. Yeah.
Great story. Great. Yeah. Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
How you doing? Good. So Hilary, I got one of Hilary's books last week, and I brought it home and I put it on my coffee table. And I have two 20-something daughters who live with me, and I just sort of left it there and I walked away. And every time I turn around, I'm telling you, my kids are reading your book, which is so cool. And one day, one of my daughters, my 26-year-old daughter, came up to me and said, "Will this help me with my panic attacks?" So I think your title is so wonderful, really alluring, and really attracted them to the book. So I'm really grateful for that. I think it's going to help them.
Oh, great.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Barbara.
Yeah.
Then
I'll send them to you for the panic attacks.
Thank you so much for coming, guys. Another round of applause for them, please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out in the rain. I'm so touched.